Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we take our favorite books off the shelf, dust them off, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so. My name's Tom Galley. Joining me today, we've got Tony Pasculi.
Thanks, Tom.
And today, this is a dim and distant childhood favorite of mine. We're talking about Lin Carter's Under the Green Star.
So interested to hear about why this is a favorite book. And because I didn't like it as much as probably you did, I'm just going to take this opportunity to say favorites don't have to be justified or defended. They're favorites. Yeah. So you know where my opinion's going on this.
Okay, fair enough.
But it's so curious why it does not seem like the kind of book that, because you read this when you were young, it does not seem like the kind of book that would appeal to a young reader to me. So I'm very curious.
Well, you know, I don't know that I can answer why was it a favorite. I know that I read this book over and over and over again.
Fascinating.
And I think that I read it over and over and over again when it was new, because I remember being so excited when the third book came out. There are now 5 of them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I had to be reading it when it was current. But I had a copy that was just thumbed and dog-eared and ragged, so I know that it was a favorite. I can only kind of speculate why that might have been. But, you know...
Did you enjoy the reread?
Wow, did I enjoy the reread.
Wow, that's awesome.
You know, and it's funny to me because as I started getting into it, you know, I'm not even 3 or 4 chapters in, I'm like, okay, this is Edgar Rice Burroughs.
It absolutely is.
You know,
he says as much in the afterword.
Yeah, in the afterwards, he says he was writing an Edgar Rice Burroughs book because he loved Edgar Rice Burroughs books, but Edgar Rice Burroughs books had problems, so he deliberately set out to improve on Edgar Rice Burroughs.
For my money, he missed the mark. He improved the stuff of Edgar Rice Burroughs that didn't need improving and went so far stylistically in the opposite direction that, for me, Burroughs is a better read. Yeah.
Huh. Well, I found it, again, just a rip-roaring good time. I loved the opening premise, not that it's terribly original.
Yeah.
You know, astral projection leads somebody to an alternate life. And again, lifted straight from Burroughs in this case. But hey, there was a body at the other end.
Yeah.
So, you know, we got around that thing. But I mean, the fact that we had, and, you know, it starts with a tragic hero, right? We've got this young man who is a person of means, but whose legs were destroyed by polio.
He's basically a Marvel hero waiting to happen. Yeah. In the opening scenes.
Yes, he is. You know, but he has the resources and the time and the intellect to devote to tracking down the resources, you know, in this esoteric Tibetan book that he ultimately finds that teaches him the secrets to astral voyaging.
I have to say that I actually loved the opening chapters of this book. I was so excited. It's like, yes, this is clearly an update on Princess of Mars, where, you know, John Carter falls asleep in a cave, and that's how he ends up on Mars, which is like bizarre. And this is a much better, I mean, in terms of fixing that, great. You know, the astral projection and the occult book and the secret knowledge and all of that. Love it. Wonderful. Incredibly detailed.
Yeah.
All very exciting stuff. Yeah.
You know, and then, you know, what does he do with his newfound freedom? Well, of course, what any regular person would do, let's go visit Mars.
Yes.
And hey, what do you know? There were cities on Mars. There was a race. Of course, it was dead. You know, they were all fossilized, you know. So, I mean, he that was a step that did nothing for me, other than to kind of say, hey, look, if you hadn't figured it out yet, Burroughs has a tie to this book, you know. And then he gets attracted to the Green Star.
The Green Star, which is just the so on-the-nose, obvious counterpoint to the Red Star of Mars. Yeah. So.
Well, okay, all right. I hadn't actually put that together, but yeah. You know, and then from there, it's just a very Indiana Jones, you know, adventure after adventure after adventure, you know, piling up to be knocked down like dominoes. And, you know, it's just it's what it is, right? You end up with, he is a barbarian hero, right? He comes awake with impeccable dramatic timing. He awakens in the body of a fallen hero to save the princess and the kingdom. And then all his travails thereafterwards are saved by a combination of intellect and brute force.
So that is where the book lost me. And I'm willing to admit that maybe I just missed something, because I went and I read the Amazon reviews afterwards, and people, it's like all these 5-star reviews, and people are just like, this is a short, fast read. This is thrilling. What an adventure. And I'm like, that was not my experience. I finished this book last night because I did not find a rewarding read at all for two reasons. But the topic we're on right now is the adventure aspect. And until they actually fall out of the Jeweled City and into the land of the bandits, nothing happens.
There is a considerable amount of interlude there. You know, the whole, okay, I'm in an alien city, I'm having to learn the language, which I learned quickly, but I still have to learn it.
Yeah.
There's a bit of nothing there. And in a really short read like that, it's kind of a shame that we didn't get to the adventuring a little bit sooner.
Yeah. And, you know, and in terms of the characters, we get a lot of the narrator because we're getting his voice and his impressions of the world. But this queen that he's in love with, literally all we know about her is that she's hot. Yeah. She's pretty. She looks good in very particular clothes. We get incredible descriptions of her wardrobe. She never does anything. They never have a conversation in the book. I'm like, why are you attracted to this woman? Well, except beyond the obvious, but come on.
Yeah, you're right. We don't get to find much out about her. And, you know, should you persist in reading, you know, beyond the first book, we continue to not find very much out about her.
That's unfortunate. Yeah.
But, you know, I don't actually have a problem with that because in the context of the book, right, our hero is not somebody that has any experience with women. He's a good-looking enough guy on Earth, but he's a cripple, and that dominates his social life. He allows it. I don't know if he allows it or if, you know, during the time that was the way things actually were. But whatever, he has no experience with women. So the fact that suddenly he sees a hot princess and he is in, you know, the body of a heroic figure, I don't really have a problem with that instant infatuation kicking on.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's a fair point. And I don't have a problem with him being infatuated. And I guess, you know, given his inexperience, you could extend infatuation to love in his case.
Yeah, I think that he's probably conflating the two because, whatever.
As a reader, though, I was disappointed to not be given more of this character who's supposed to be, I mean, she's the second most important character, other than the other woman who falls in love with him. You know.
Oh, yeah, the Bandit Queen?
Yeah, Siona something. Yeah, we get a lot more of her than we do of the princess.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So that happens like, I want to say they fall into the bandit land. They basically fall off a leaf, right?
Yep.
And that's about halfway through the book, I would say.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. So the second half of the book kind of moves along a little bit more. But okay, go ahead. Your impressions. I'm sorry. I'm hijacking.
Well, again, you know, this is not something to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Right, there has to be a love interest so that there can be a love interest, right? There has to be a princess so that she can be rescued, so that they can perform feats of heroic daring do. There have to be adversaries, whether it's the evil king of the adjacent city or the predatory insects that threaten them when they fall off, or, you know, the evil pirates who they find themselves living amongst.
I think by the time I got to the second half of the book, because now that I'm reflecting on it, there's a lot happens in the second half. They get attacked by a vampire plant. They get rescued by bandits. The bandits imprison them. There's the evil Slygon who he offends. And
what a name, Slygon for a bad
pretty
guy.
Good. Yeah.
You can just picture the oily, greasy little, you know, deformed. He should be a dwarf, but he's not because, you know, he ends up going toe to toe with our hero.
Yeah. He is crippled in some way, right?
He seems to be deformed in some way, but it's a meaningless way because, again, he does straight up hand-to-hand combat and ends up slaying.
Yeah. Yeah, that was kind of surprising too. It's like, what? That's it? He stabbed you and you're dead now?
Yeah. This is not how this should end. I mean, even if he had gotten stabbed, it's the sort of thing, you know, in this sort of book, he should shrug it off. He's the hero.
Yes.
Right? He's not meant to die, and he's certainly not meant to die at the hands of such a thoroughly disreputable, dislikable character.
Yeah. I did like his reflection at the end. So when he dies, clearly his astral self is forced out of the dead body and finds its way home. And there's a little bit of a medical crisis there because he's been away for so long. That's something that bothered me initially. He said, and I realized I could just leave my body unattended for weeks at a time. It's like, really? So I'm glad that paid off.
Yeah. Well,
But
he
then,
made the effort. He talks about going into the state of
yeah,
slower respiration and slower heartbeat. But weeks at
yeah,
a time seem to stretch.
yeah. But then he comes back and he's like, well, I could go back. I could go back. But, then I wouldn't. This is my favorite part of the book, honestly, beyond the opening chapters, is his reflection on what would happen if he went back. He would no longer be, what's the hero's name?
I was trying to
The
remember that
body,
myself.
Chogar or something. Chogan, Kogan. It was something
Kroger.
close enough to Conan.
Yeah.
Anyway, he wouldn't be in that body and the princess wouldn't recognize him. And so he couldn't be in love with her, which seemed like a really surprisingly mature observation from this character, given the depth of their relationship up to that point, which was not much. And of course, if they had had a connection beyond, I think he looked good in those clothes, they would have been able to have a relationship in a different body. I mean, that's the staple of all kinds of science fiction and fantasy, is the person you love comes back in a different body, and you reestablish that connection. But of course, they couldn't because they did not have one. Yeah.
Yep. I'm not able to find his name easily. I can't believe I've forgotten it. I assume that you haven't pursued the subsequent books.
I have not. Like I said, I just finished this last night. It was a little bit of a slog for me to read. Again, the first chapters, loved them, and then now we can start talking about the language.
Yeah.
Because I found it initially charming. It was a very affected style. A very, very strong stylistic choice that is informed by Burroughs but departs from Burroughs. And it's like, oh, this guy never met an adjective he didn't like. It's like he's getting paid by the adjective instead of by the word, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's just, good Lord. I highlighted some.
There's a surprising amount of description in something this short. And, we get really good descriptions of a lot of clothing. We get many good descriptions of the green world or the planet, and the cities and whatnot.
For me, there's so much either duplication or contradiction in his adjectives that it actually slows me down when I read. So here's a sample sentence of a short one. Into the mosque-domed palace they swept with regal and imperious stride. The regal and imperious are synonyms. You don't need both of those. And are they sweeping or are they striding? I mean, pick one, dude. And yes. So, and you don't need moss domed either. It could just be domed. They swept into the domed palace with a regal, no, not with a regal stride. I don't know. Yeah, they just swept into the domed palace.
Period.
Imperiously. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, if the repetition bothers you, then don't read on, because the subsequent books, we get repeated descriptions of the fact that, hey, the green world is surrounded by clouds and the green star has to reach through the clouds. I mean, He comes back to this on an almost chapterly basis. And there's other things like that he repeats over, and you're like, if you were to take out all of these things where you're re-describing the same thing, you would have had a 40-minute read rather than a 2.5 read.
My overwhelming impression after I read this is that I would have loved this as a short story, even a long short story, a novella or novelette at best. But no, a long short story, 17,000 words, would have done it for this. And over that length, I think the style would have been a delight rather than an impediment. And I think there's about the right amount of incident for 17,000 words. So, but I don't know how long this is. 65,000 words. I think it's a short novel.
It is a short novel.
Yeah.
The average read time on Kindle was 2.5 hours. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's quite short.
Well, yeah, I approached this with a great deal of trepidation because it's something that it had been so long since I read. I have only faint memories. I knew that a guy astrally traveled into the body of an old fallen hero on the Green Star, and I knew that there were adventures, and that was literally about what I remembered of it.
Yeah.
So I was just pleased as punch as I was going through it that I still really did enjoy this thing.
I am thrilled for you that you enjoyed it, and you got to rediscover an old love, and that's what we're about here, right?
Yep.
Yeah, reminding ourselves why we love our old favorites. So
now it's a little bit outside, but I am proceeding through the rest of them because why not? Since I'm in the neighborhood. It's a little bit annoying. He finds another host body, right? He has to for there to be more than one book. Yeah. But there's a lovely affectation in that we find out in the preface and a couple of editorial notes in the second book that the what he has done, our Voyager, is when he has returned to Earth, he has transcribed these notes, he locks them in a vault, never to be seen again until he's dead. Well, it turns out his will mandates they be published. So his lawyers and his family were looking at it, but the problem is his family is a prestigious one, and they have produced senators and judges, and they don't want his name attached to something as clearly flighty as this. So the lawyers approach Lin Carter, who is a known science fiction editor and writer, and ask Lin Carter to publish it under his own name. So, I mean, and this is explicit in the prologue and in the afterwards.
I like that.
And in the afterwards to the third one, Lin Carter is addressing us directly, or addressing his editors directly and saying, if this is nominated for a Hugo, please decline it. If ever I win, or when I win my Hugo, I want it to be for something I've actually written. So, I mean, he's really taking it to the extreme. It reminded me a bit of not Morgan Stern, but
Princess
Bride.
Yeah.
Goldman.
Yeah, William Goldman.
Doing the same thing, weaving this meta universe around the book that he's created.
That's fun. Yeah, I had read somewhere. I went and looked up the author because it's like, is this some guy who just dashed off this novel and then vanished without a trace? You know, obviously not because there were sequels, but no, he was a really prolific author.
Yeah.
He was active in fandom. He was the president of SFWA, I believe, at one point. He won a Nova Award. I don't even know what that is. He edited a couple of imprints for major science fiction publishers. You know, I mean, he was hugely influential as an editor.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if I recall correctly from the afterwards, this was actually his 30th novel. So I mean, he was a veteran writer when he decided to dash this off.
Yeah.
And I think dash this off probably is the appropriate terminology.
He says he wrote like 5 or 6 books a year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh Lord. Okay. That's quite quick.
I think this would be a fantastic either big screen or miniseries adaptation. I think that you could bring this to the visualize this quite successfully in the modern day of CGI.
I would love to see this as a traditional cell animation. I think that medium would really suit this feel. It's got that, you know, because modern CGI feels so modern, and this doesn't feel. It feels very retro to me.
Okay, I can see that.
Yeah. So, and of course, you know, people are doing cell animation with computer help these days anyway. So,
also true.
Yeah.
So, what do you think? Was the green world actually populated by gigantic beings, or were the humanity equivalents tiny?
I have to go with the tiny humans because of the inverse square law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea that, you know, we're 3 miles above ground level and the atmosphere here is fine.
Yeah.
But even if we go higher or lower, the atmosphere remains fine because there's so many big trees.
And there are dragonflies that can support a human being in flight. Yeah.
Yep.
So, those are little humans, not big dragonflies.
Yeah. I kind of believe that myself.
That was interesting because I assumed I had skipped over something initially. And then again, like halfway through the book, he speculates on this. He actively speculates, am I a small person in a regular sized world? Or,
And actually not that you've gotten there, in the third book, there is a point where they're out of, you know, in the wilderness. And as they're breakfasting, they're washing it down with melon-sized dewdrops.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, I mean, that at that point becomes a giveaway,
that's
right?
Confirmation.
Surface tension of water, you know, a dewdrop only gets so big.
All right, here's a question for you. Having read the sequels, so he always goes back to the Green Star? He doesn't explore other parts of the universe?
All of these happen under the Green Star.
Interesting.
You know, is explicit by the name. So I'm in the middle of the third one right now. The fourth one is only available as an audiobook for some reason. So I may well stop after the third one or skip to the fifth one. We'll see what happens there. But what I am discovering is that books 2 and 3 are nowhere near as enthralling to me as book 1 was.
Interesting. And is that because, you know, you read them all at the same time? Yeah, I know you said you waited for them. So it's not like the others are new to you. They just don't hold up.
Well, they're newer, right? So, I mean, clearly I read the first one over and over again, and then there was a second one, so then I read the first 2 and that sort of thing. But so the hero dies in the end of the first book. He can't go back to that body. He can't
Yeah.
go back to being the hero. When he does make it back for the subsequent books, in the books 2, 3, 4, and 5, he stays in the same body. He's a 17-year-old kid.
Oh, interesting.
And there's a little bit of fun to be had with that because now he's interacting with other people and, you know, he's an adolescent. And he can't get the respect he feels like he deserves type of deal. But there's so much repetition in the second and the third book. It's like, you know, and within the context of a book, literally, how many times do you need to describe the fact that the planet is shrouded by clouds, so the green light filters through the clouds and through the golden leaves, and then as you get deeper down, it gets darker. How many times do you need to repeat that?
Well, here's the thing. He is really, really big on tell over show. And, you know, you've heard the famous writing adage, you know, show, don't tell. And sort of more modern wisdom is show and tell both when it's appropriate. And this book is all tell. And the problem with that, when you get to describing the green light filtering through the green clouds again and again and again, is it is simply repetition. Whereas you can make that same point another way. There's a famous Chekhov quote where he says, Don't tell me that the moon is shining brightly. Show me the reflection. Show me the glint of the moonlight off a broken bottle by the riverside. You know, and if he did that, if he showed rather than telling, it wouldn't feel as heavy-handed and imposing, I think. And he does not do that.
I'm not sure how Chekhov and Burroughs would combine, but it's an interesting thought. All right. Now, you said there were a couple of things that bothered you about it, and there was a second one you wanted to circle back around to.
So the first one is, we covered them actually. The first one is the story, which really doesn't kick into gear. Aside from that initial pre-story of how he gets the magic tome and does the astral projection, which is all fascinating, and I loved it. Then there's a whole lot of stall in the kingdom until they land in with the bandits. So the story really was sluggish for me. And the lack of character, you know, connection between those two principles. But the other thing is the language, which we talked about. It's just so, I have so many highlighted here.
What's another highlight?
There came into her features such an expression of snarling feline fury and gloating cruelty. And I just like, really? She couldn't just snarl or feline fury or gloating cruelty. It's like, again,
now,
man.
simply one of them would not convey just how snarly, feline, evil she was.
I disagree. I think the more adjectives you lard on there, the less you make your point, at least for me. Yeah. And, you know, I'm not convinced he knows all the words that he's using because beauteous and regal lady began the fattest of the three in an unctuous voice, so suave it virtually dripped with oil. Unctuous means oily. Yeah. So you don't need to say it was dripping with oil. And, you know, if you're going you don't need suave also. And you don't need to say beauteous and regal. And it's like, I mean, except for that, actually I make an exception for that because that beauteous and regal is an example of being unctuous. Yeah. So keep that excessive repetition into the dialogue and you make your point, except that it doesn't stand out in this book as a character choice. Yeah.
All right. Well,
anyway, but
I've got to say, I really am impressed with how well it held up for me. I did not expect that. I thought this was going to be one of those that I would cringe while I was reading it, and I was like, no, I'm having a good time.
You know, it's the same thing with Midnight at the Well of Souls. You know, I read that book and I just go, wow, this writing is not good. Jack Chalker, you are a hack. But it's just a wonderful adventure, and I love it, and I make no apologies for it, and neither should you.
I make none. I will still recommend it to people.
All right. I will not. I will recommend Burroughs, though. It did do that for me. I went and I dredged up my old copy of Princess of Mars on the Kindle. I'm going to reread that because there is something about adventures of this type. Sword and Planet. I didn't know there was a name for this genre.
Huh.
Sword and Planet
Sword
epic.
and Planet.
Yeah. And there's something about that I find very, very appealing. And the fact that this fits in that genre, that is lovely. And I think if the language is delightful in small doses. It's just that as an entire narrative, it's like reading an entire book in italics, you know? So yeah, there was a lot of fun to be had here, but for me, it was buried under too much ornamentation.
So what will we talk about next?
Next, we have a book, a meaty, mighty tome by James Clavell, the first in the Asian saga, which I'm not sure how to pronounce correctly, but I believe it is Shogun.
I know that they made that as a TV miniseries, which was called Shogun.
That's how I've always said it, but having studied a little bit of Japanese, I'm pretty sure that's wrong. Yeah.
Well, we will see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.